Welcome back. Now to Stars and Gripes, where we pick apart the deceptive, dodgy tactics of the American media and have a good laugh at their expense. First up, the new White House press sec, Karoline Leavitt, takes no prisoners. Now, she has faced the most absurd insults for being a young woman, but it hasn't slowed her down one bit. This week, she stood up at the podium and returned fire at journalists attempting to lecture her about the truth.
Do you view yourself and your role as advocating on behalf of the president or providing the unvarnished truth that is, not to lie, not to obfuscate to the American people?
I commit to telling the truth from this podium every single day. I commit to speaking on behalf of the President of the United States. That is my job. And I will say it's very easy to speak truth from this podium when you have a president who is implementing policies that are wildly popular with the American people, and that's exactly what this administration is doing. It's correcting the lies and the wrongs of the past 4 years, many of the lies that have been told to your faces in this very briefing room. I will not do that. But since you brought up Truth Seek, I would like to point out, while I vowed to provide the truth from this podium, we ask that all of you in this room hold yourselves to that same standard. We know for a fact there have been lies that have been pushed by many legacy media outlets in this country about this president, about his family, and we will not accept that. We will call you out when we feel that your reporting is wrong or there is misinformation about this White House. So yes, I will hold myself to the truth, and I expect everyone in this room to do the same.
You might recall that many US media outlets shamelessly lied about the Russia collusion hoax, the laptop from hell, and don't even get me started on that sordid COVID saga. Unfortunately for these hacks, their integrity and trust is now gone. They can't lecture conservatives anymore because they have been acting as operatives, not reporters, for so many years. Let's bring in Sky News contributor Kosha Garda. Now, Kosha, every time that we see this woman, she gets more and more impressive from my point of view. We've spoken previously about the attacks she's received from the hosts at The View, talking about her looks, her age, all these things that I thought progressives wouldn't criticise about a woman. But here she is telling the media, I'm going to be honest, but I expect you to be honest as well.
Yes, she is becoming quite the firebrand, and all of Trump's picks this time in many ways sort of mirror his own style. They put their own spin on it, but all his cabinet picks, whether it's her, whether it's other advisors like Elon Musk, they're all sort of made for TV. They're very comfortable with and in fact even thrive with jousting with the media and being adversarial with the media where it calls for it. They pretty much have a lot of clarity, I think, as well on the positions, which helps. And then the biggest point of all is what you mentioned there, and what she mentioned as well, that the facts and the popularity of their positions and their policy platform are on their side, where basically they are in sync with the American people. All these measures that they're putting in place are very, very popular with the American people, and they just sort of have to go around or maybe ram through an adversarial media, and she seems to really enjoy that, and she's certainly finding her stride.
Well said. Remember when the left used to rage against the machine? Those days are over. The counterculture has become being conservative, and those journalists who once would have broken corruption and fraud scandal stories throughout the government have instead relegated themselves to the role of defender.
Donald Trump's unelected co-president Elon Musk has control over virtually every part of our government as head of the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, which is not a department. And crucially, he can hide everything he is doing from the American public. You see, because Trump has designated his department initiative as presidential records, which is not what departments are, which means he now is able to skirt open records laws, according to the New York Times.
They never seem to have an issue with the unelected masked bureaucrats running America into the ground when Joe Biden was cognitively incapable of making a decision. There was 4 years of a very sick man signing documents he probably couldn't even understand, while unelected staffers ran the joint. But now that Elon is in play, being unelected is all of a sudden a problem. Have they forgotten that Trump very clearly stated he was going to do this with Elon at the helm before the election? The people voted and they wanted Elon. But now Elon is cutting wasteful and fraudulent funds. Those parasites who enrich themselves on tax funds are cranky. And I get the bureaucrats being angry. They want to keep their jobs. But the journalists should know better. Instead, the New York Times has the gall to suggest that fraud could not happen in government. The billionaire, whose federal cost-cutting team has been operating in secrecy, asserted that he had uncovered waste and fraud across the bureaucracy without providing evidence. Really? Well, as anti-censorship activist Michael Schellenberger pointed out, journalists are always writing about fraud. He also came with receipts. Schellenberger shared out a fraud risk management document from the US Government Accountability Office, which, by the way, was published while Biden was in power. And it showed that the US government loses between $233 billion and $521 billion to fraud every single year. Let's bring Kosher back in. The language, I think, is kind of what I want to focus on. Using the phrase unelected, what they're trying to suggest is that there is something dishonest, potentially illegal, it's unelected, it's like a stolen administration. That's why they're using that word. And you may agree with me. I've been noticing it slip into every news report, but these same people would never, ever go down that same path of logical reasoning when unelected bureaucrats were running the government under Biden.
Yes, I think from a media perspective, it's clear that they got the memo. Something has been sort of circulated, you would think, because everybody from Time magazine put Musk behind the Resolute desk in the Oval Office on its cover. You have actually elected representatives in Congress using that phrase, and everybody in the media is using that phrase. It can't be a coincidence. So you can see certain narratives taking shape, and they're sort of top down, and this is one that they've decided is something they could sell. Maybe for people who aren't paying attention, it sort of resonates with them. Okay, yeah, he's unelected. Maybe they're playing to good old-fashioned envy, where people are sort of envious of somebody like Musk getting involved, but they're doing this narrative. It doesn't stand up to scrutiny for anybody who is paying attention or thinks about it more, for the simple fact that there are something like 2.5 million employees in the federal government. Most of them are unelected. They serve at the pleasure of those who are elected, our senators, our congresspeople, and the president. So there's all sorts of people who help these elected representatives do their job, and Elon just happens to be somebody who's a familiar face publicly, so they've made him a target, but it crumbles pretty quickly for anybody paying attention and thinking about it logically.
As there should be. I mean, there's bureaucrats in every single government around the world. It's so ridiculous. But let's move on, because many of these media outlets which have been caught peddling falsehoods, well, they're struggling. The Daily Mail reports that CNN and MSNBC are bleeding viewers, so much so that Fox News now reaches more Democrats than either of these lefty stations. The Daily Mail reports total primetime viewers for the network totaled 427,000 for Democratic voters, while CNN reached only 174,000 Dems and MSNBC hit 255,000. Kosher, that's extraordinary to me. So Fox News actually has a bigger market penetration to Democrats. It looks like even the left, even voters who would traditionally support Democrats, are saying these people are so nuts, I can't even watch them.
It is really interesting. So Fox has historically always had around 20 to 30% of their viewership be Democrats in terms of percentage terms, and another 30% are independents. So like 50% of their viewership are independents or Democrats and 50% are Republicans. And as the absolute number of eyeballs that go to Fox News now and away from the other networks has grown, that crossover point has happened, where in absolute terms they actually have now surpassed CNN and MSNBC combined in terms of Democrat viewers. And those two networks have the numbers look even worse for independents because they have very few independents and they have virtually no Republicans watching them. And then that probably goes to explain some of what we've talked about in the other segments, where if that's who they're speaking to, it informs the programming decisions that they're making, because it's a shrinking pool of diehard Democrats and a smaller and smaller cohort of them that are watching those two networks. And so the programming speaks to them and that downward spiral continues. And meanwhile, the more moderate or centrist, center-left types are flocking to Fox or independent media, and I think that trend is only going to continue.
Well said as always, Kosher Gada. Thank you so much for your time.